An Apple a Day by Hyperme. Chapter 15. "We've got another newbie today, Raito-sensei," Kiyomi mentioned just as he had opened the clinic door. "They're just piling in these days." Raito frowned and took the manila folder the nurse handed him.
"Billy Bob, and you let him schedule an appointment? This is obviously an alias."
"Raito-sensei," she said with an exasperated glance, "almost every patient here is an alias."
"But never one this obvious." He shook the manila folder in his hand. "With Erochigo Isha still out on the loose and coming in 3 days, we need to be on the lookout. Someone with the name of Billy Bob is bound for trouble, even in America where it's more common than here in Japan. He could be a spy."
"Why would Isha-san let us know he's sending a spy? Wouldn't he want it to be unknown?"
"That's a good point. Not a spy then. Maybe he wants us to call the police so we can capture this Billy Bob, thinking he's their man. Then while everyone believes Isha is in jail, the real Isha-san will strike on Friday."
Kiyomi stared along and arted her boss. "Did you sleep well last night?"
"No, not at all."
Raito had in fact slept terribly the night before. His dreams were haunted yet again by El, Isha, and El's replica. He would wake up screaming from a nightmare, fall back asleep an hour later, wake up screaming yet again, fall back asleep an hour later, and repeat 2 more times. "No! You did not sleep well last night." "Well, Bob-san will be here today a little after lunch. The first appointment isn't until 8, an hour and a half from now. Why don't you go ahead and take a short nap? I'll wake you up before we get there." As much as Raito didn't want to admit weakness, he knew if this Billy Bob was sent by Isha, he would not be able to fight him off. He would end up passing out in the middle of the appointment anyway, the perfect chance for a strike. He yawned and wandered off to the back of the clinic to the resting room. Raito laid across a small sofa and fell asleep, realizing that this sofa was where El had slept on top of him. Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful prince who lived in the deep part of a forest. His parents were terrified that someone would try to kill him, for the prince was blessed with beauty and intelligence. They sent him to live with his relatives in their secluded house. The prince grew bored at his family's house and often snuck out at night to wander around the forest. He would pack himself an apple and explore until daybreak. One day the prince stumbled across a small lake where the treetops would part for the bright moonlight to shine upon the surface of the water. He sat down on a rock at the edge and took out his apple, polishing it on his old baggy shirt. Just before the prince took a bite of the apple, a loud groan broke the silent tranquility of the lake. The prince jumped, looking around cautiously.
"Who's there?"
he called. The bushes vibrated and the prince inched back. The bushes parted and a black figure collapsed to the ground and crawled its way to the lake. The prince looked curiously at the weird shape that had seemed to not have seen him yet.
"Hello,"
the prince greeted. The figure froze in place. Then it moved again, standing up and moving closer to him. The prince grew worried, wondering if he made the right decision by talking to it. The figure moved closer still until it was under the light of the moon. In place of a dark figure was a tall man with raven, messy hair, black eyes, deathly pale skin with black rings under his eyes, and a slouched posture. He blinked at the prince.
"Hello,"
he croaked.
"You sound terrible. Whatever is wrong?"
the prince asked.
"I have not been feeling well the past few days,"
the stranger said.
"My stomach is in great pain."
"Did you eat something bad, stranger?" he asked again. The stranger shook his head.
"No, I have been eating nothing but my favorite cakes and desserts, but even they don't help at all."
The prince laughed.
"Why, stranger, you have just said the problem yourself. No man can live off of cakes and desserts. You will get sick. Here."
He pulled out his shiny red apple and held it out for the man.
"Try an apple."
The stranger took it carefully by the stem with his forefinger and thumb and examined it.
"Do not worry, stranger," the prince said. "It is not poisoned."
The stranger nodded and took a cautious bite. He chewed it around in his mouth, getting a feel for the taste.
"This is quite delicious. What is it called again? An apple, you say?"
The prince nodded, and the man quickly ate the apple.
"I feel better already. Thank you, my good sir. As a reward, you may have 1 wish."
"1 wish," the prince repeated.
"Wishes are for fairy tales, stranger. I hardly believe in fairy tales anymore."
The stranger smiled and leaned in closer to the prince.
"You must start believing in fairy tales, my good sir. You're in one."
The prince frowned.
"I am afraid I do not follow." "I am an elf, my good sir. For gratitude for healing my illness and showing me the greatness apples, I will grant you 1 wish." "But I do not know what to wish for." the prince replied. "I do not need anything." The stranger did not look any less pleased. "That is just as well. You may call me whenever you know what you would like to wish for." He grasped the prince's hand and shook it. "Thank you again, my good sir." And in a flash the elf stranger was gone. All that was left was an apple core and a piece of paper in his hand with the word Laliat written on it. "Is this what he means by calling?" the prince wondered. 2 months later, the prince's aunt ran into their little cottage with news. She had heard terrible talk in the village about a deranged killer who is out to murder the prince. The prince shrugged it off as just a rumor and comforted his anxious aunt, although on the inside the prince was just as scared as she was. That night, while the prince was sleeping in his bed, a loud crash emitted from the kitchen. The prince woke up startled, breathing heavily. He gulped and adorned his robe. He slowly crept down the stairs into the kitchen. There stood a bulky man going through the cupboards. The prince let out a surprised gasp and quickly covered his mouth, but the man had heard him. "The prince!" the man yelled, running toward him. The prince yelped and ran up the stairs and into his room, locking the door. The man chased him up those stairs and banged on the door, trying to knock it off its hinges. The prince cowered in the corner, showing tears and fear on his face for the first time in his life. "There is no one to save you now, prince!" the man yelled through the door. The prince shook his head, although he knew it to be true. Who could save him now? As he pulled his arms around his knees, he accidentally bumped the desk behind him, and a slip of paper fell onto his lap. The prince took the piece of paper and read it, eyes widening. "Loliet," he whispered. "Loliet! Loliet! Loliet!" In almost a blink of an eye, warm arms were wrapped around his shivering body. "You only had to say it once, my good sir." The prince gripped at the man. "Stranger, please, I know what I want." The pounding grew harder, and the wood of the door was beginning to crack. "Please kill him before he kills me." "So it is said, so it is done, my good sir," the elf said, patting the top of the prince's head. Just at that moment, the wood of the door gave in and cracked along the middle. The killer kicked the door once more for the wood to collapse to the floor completely. The stranger stood up directly in front of the prince, forming a protective barrier between him and the killer. The killer paid no heed to the elf in front of him. His target sat on the prince behind him. He charged forward. The elf stranger held up a hand as if to signal the killer to stop. The killer ran straight into the open palm, and a bright blue light emanated from the elf's hand. The light filled up the room, and the prince shut his eyes. The light faded, and the prince peeked an eye open when he deemed it safe. The elf stood in the same spot he had been, but the killer was no longer there. "Where is he?" the prince asked, amazed. "Gone," the stranger answered simply. "You do not have to worry about him any longer, my good sir." He turned around to face him. "Or should I say prince?" "You know?" "I did not until I saw the killer. I know he has been targeting the prince of this nation for quite some time now. I did not think you were the one he was after." "You saved me," the prince whispered, as if it just dawned upon him. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling like jelly. "I did so because it was your wish. We are even now, my prince." The elf nodded and opened the window. As he was starting to climb out, the prince grabbed his white shirt. "Please do not go, stranger. You saved me. You are my hero. Please do not leave me," the prince pleaded. "I am afraid you already used your wish, my prince. Unless you were to do something else for me, I cannot do anything else for you." "Technically, I did you 2 favors. Once when I gave you the apple, and the other when I taught you about them." "But you did not know it would lead to 2 favors. Only the first one, when you granted me the apple to cure my illness. The second one was implied," the elf said, hitching himself on top of the windowsill. "No!" the prince grabbed his arm. "You can live in the castle with me, stranger. You can have all the apples you want. We have multiple kinds there. You can have your pick—" "I'm sorry, my prince," the elf interrupted. "I cannot grant you any more wishes. Please understand that." The prince nodded, eyes downcast, but did not realize his grip on the elf. "Then can you do me one small favor, stranger? After this you are free to leave, I promise." The elf was quiet, but nodded. "I can do one small favor, I suppose." The prince continued to look at the floor, and through the moonlight, the elf could see a dusting of pink on his cheeks. "Could you please kiss me goodbye?" The elf watched the prince watching the floor. He smiled, his pointy ears twitching. He leaned in, lifting the prince's chin with his forefinger. "My dear prince," the elf captured his lips. The skin was softer than he had imagined, and the lips were softer still. His hand caressed the prince's face as he tilted his own and plunged deeper into the kiss.
The prince responded with ferocity, entwining his arms around the elf's neck, pulling him closer. The elf nibbled on his bottom lip, silently asking for entrance. The prince opened his mouth and was quickly assaulted by his skilled warm tongue. He moved his own tongue into the elf's mouth to gain an upper advantage. He felt hands gripping at his brunette hair, a moment's distraction that lost him his concentration and the battle. The elf pulled back, grinning at the prince's labored breathing. "You humans have such tiny lungs. Thank you for the apple, my prince." With that, the elf slipped out of the window and disappeared into the night. The prince looked through the open window, trying to spot the elf. He did not succeed. Suddenly he remembered about the word that the stranger had written on the piece of paper. Maybe if he called it aloud again he would return. He opened his mouth, but the word had escaped him, as if he had never seen or said the word in his life. The prince panicked, going over and over through his mind to try and remember the word. "The paper!" the prince thought, looking around at the floor for the piece of paper the elf had given him. But it was gone. There were no traces of it at all. The prince gasped in realization that the elf had taken the word from his memory and destroyed the paper with his magic. The solemn prince climbed back into his bed, feeling rejected. A month later, the prince returned to the castle, where he was greeted with great enthusiasm. The prince took it all in, but gave nothing back. He could not match with their passion. The poor prince spent the rest of his days wallowing in his room, staring out at the forest where he had first met the elf. Some say the prince never left his room and died of a broken heart. Some say he got married and pretended to live happily ever after until he grew tired and killed himself. And to others they believe the elf came back one night and stole the prince, taking him back to his home in the forest. "Raito-sensei! Raito-sensei!" he heard whispering in his ear. He hummed as a response and flipped over in his sleep. "Raito-sensei, the first patient will be arriving soon. Please wake up now." Reluctantly, Raito opened his eyes, blinking away the sleep. He saw Kiyomi standing over him, his white doctor coat in her hands. He pushed himself up and grabbed the coat. "Did you have a nice nap, Raito-sensei?" Raito shrugged on his coat. "It was refreshing." "Did you have a dream?" "Yes, but it's fading fast." "I was just asking because you looked really sad when I came in. I guess if it was a sad dream, it's a good thing you're forgetting about it, right?" Kiyomi said with a small encouraging smile. "Misa will be arriving late today. Her brother forgot his homework and she has to drive it over to him. She'll be here during the first patient's appointment. Do your best today, Raito-sensei." Raito shot her a sleepy smile. "Of course, I always do, Kiyomi-chan." He walked out of the resting room and into the examination room to clean it. He closed the door and sighed, dropping his sleepy smile. His eyes grew calculating, and he frowned. He lied when he said he had forgotten all about the dream. He knew he was the prince, and El was the elf stranger. He remembered how the elf stranger had left the prince. It didn't make him feel better on the inside. Raito felt bad for lying to Kiyomi. She was the trustworthy one of the two nurses. Misa has betrayed him to Zayu for the last time. But he felt little comfort that he hadn't lied completely. He did forget a little detail. Like the prince, Raito had forgotten the elf's name. No matter how hard he racked his brain, he couldn't remember it. And he thought that was the worst part of all. Raito braced himself for the arrival of Billy Bob. Although he was well rested and in a better state of mind than when he had accused the newcomer of being affiliated with a man out to kill him, he was still borderlining paranoia. The clock struck 1 o'clock, chiming softly, when the door opened, revealing a pale young man with short, spiky brown hair and blue eyes. He didn't look Asian at all. He smiled at Raito, his lips red and his teeth white. "Hello?" He spoke slowly with a terrible accent. "You must be Dr. Lato, right?" "Yes, I'm Raito-sensei," he said, stressing the slight R in his name. "'Tis a pleasure, Doctor," Bob said happily, enthusiastically pumping Raito's hand. Raito quickly pulled his hand back and told him to follow him, with a perfectly placed fake warm smile. The man followed, smiling at the nurses, who returned the smile, if not a bit less eager as his was. Raito did not shut the door completely like he did with most patients, keeping it open just a tad in case this man attacked him. Someone would hear his screams easier. "What brings you here today, Bob-san?" He seemed to have caught the man off guard. "I'm sorry, I did not hear it. I am just learning Japanese." "Do you speak in any other language?" Raito asked slower. Bob took a few seconds out to translate the sentence before clapping his hands. "Yes, I speaks English and French." He switched over to English.
Is this easier? Bob smiled brightly, nodding excitedly. Yes, I can understand you much better now. I hope I also sound just as different. You do, believe me. Raito took out his manila folder with the name Bob Billy written on it. What brings you here today, Bob-san? Well, I want to apply for a job, but nobody would take my resume without a physical. I just moved to Japan from America to study the language, and nobody takes American doctor approvals. Raito nodded, scribbling down a note. Okay, then would you please take off your shirt? Bob gasped in jesting surprise. Doctor, I couldn't. We just met. Raito ignored the comment, snapping at him to get it done. Bob had laughed in response, pulling off his shirt. Raito was surprised to see a long run of scars down his chest and back. Don't bother asking about them, Doc. Bob grinned. You wouldn't believe me anyway. As Raito was giving his checkup, he discovered or gained evidence for his theory that Billy Bob was quite the talker. He told the doctor his entire life story, from the time he was in diapers to the strawberry donut he ate on the way to the clinic. Raito nodded dumbly as he checked his blood pressure, barely registering Bob's story on the stalkers in America. My sister had one, and my brother had one, and my mom had one, and my dad had one, and my grandfather had one, and my cat had one, and my imaginary friend had one. Yes, very fascinating, Raito muttered, recording the man's healthy blood pressure. He pulled out his ear examination tool. Down your head, please. The man continued to babble on as Raito checked his clean ears. He scribbled that down as well. Well, you seem to be in perfect condition, Bob-san. Do you exercise and eat well regularly? Well, I don't exercise that much. I just have a good metabolism, I guess. I eat a lot of strawberries and cherries, though, especially apples. Raito looked up at the beaming man and couldn't help to smile back. Now, here's a patient who knows how to take care of himself. Well, you know the saying, Doc, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Bob laughed, then paused, blinking at Raito. You know, Doc, he suddenly grinned, leaning forward. You downright sexy. I'm not all too sure I want you away. Raito stiffened and the wink tossed his way. Bob-san, I will ask you to refrain using inappropriate remarks around your doctor. That is frowned upon here in Japan. Raito started, but got cut off mid-sentence by a noise from his patient. Who needs to know? A one-night stand won't kill nobody, nohow. Bob said, although if he really did work for Isha, a one-night stand would kill him. Raito opened his mouth again to tell the man off, manners or not, when Bob leaned in closer until their lips touched on the briefest of contact. The doctor jumped back and punched the man straight across the jaw. Bob flew to the ground, landing on his side. He sat up and rubbed his chest. That stings, Doc. I barely kissed you and you would thank me as if I was trying to rip your clothes up with my mouth. Do you have a problem with people touching you with germ phobia, huh? Raito caught his breath, regaining his posture. I have someone, and I do not like to be unfaithful. Bob's demeanor perked up significantly. Really? You have a lover? Is it not what I just said? I was just clarifying, Doc. Bob stood up, rubbing his bruised side. This changes things. This changes the whole thing. Are you done now? Can you leave? Raito growled, agitated to translate for the man. Bob walked past him with an aura of elegance, taking time to stop and look over his shoulder at him. I could take it when I'm not wanted, but if you ever want to take up that offer, you have my number. He winked, grinning wildly. On the way out, he also sent a flirty wink at the nurses. They practically yawned in apathy as he closed the clinic door behind him. But once the door clicked into place, they were on him like hunting dogs, all apathy out the window and in the trash. What happened? We heard the crash and you hurt? He pulled out a knife, didn't he? Misa inquired, hands curled into a fist as if ready to stalk out to the parking lot and give Billy Bob what's coming to him. No, he tried to come on to you, right? Kiyomi asked, calmer than her overdramatic co-worker, but just as curious. Stop it, Kiyomi-chan! Misa laughed cruelly. I told you before, Bob-san wouldn't go after Raito-sensei that way. He's out for his throat! No, Kiyomi-chan's right, Raito said, sending Misa into a state of frenzy and Kiyomi into a fit of uncharacteristic, oh yeah, beat that bitch! God damn it! Misa yelled. Raito was touched that the blonde nurse cared so much about him until she pulled out her wallet from her back pocket and handed over a $20 bill. I was hoping you would be slaughtered, Raito-sensei! God damn you and your good looks! She altered in her curses to speak softer. You're okay, right, Raito-sensei? He really didn't try to, rape you or anything, did he? No, he offered me a one-night stand and then kissed me.
That's all?
Raito nodded, and the nurses sighed in relief simultaneously.
That's good. I was worried he had thrown you on the ground with the crash that we heard.
I had punched him after he kissed me, that's all, Raito explained, handing Kiyomi the manila folder.
She took it and Misa frowned. He wasn't that bad looking, Raito-sensei, and he's a health nut like you,
she exclaimed, looking over at his perfect health record.
Why didn't you accept? You never grew out, never show any interest? You're such a stick in the mud. I'm sure Bob-san thought so too.
He didn't think that, Raito defended himself, crossing his arms over his chest. I told him I denied him because I was in a relationship and don't like to be disloyal.
The nurse's mouths drop open. You did what?
Misa shrieked. Raito-sensei, you're not in a relationship. Why did you lie to him? I'm not too sure. I didn't trust him, that's for sure. But it just felt right saying that. Raito said, half wondering why he felt like he was in a commitment when he truly wasn't.
Raito-sensei, I know this is kind of taboo, but...
Misa twiddled her fingers nervously.
You're in love with Ryuga Hideki, right? Maybe that's why you felt the need to say you were in a relationship, because you still feel like you have an obligation to him.
He is far from my mind, Misa-chan. Raito gritted out. Hideki-san has no bearing on this situation at all. He and Bob-san have that in common. I do not care about either of them. Hideki-san is annoying and Bob-san is stupid. He can't even speak Japanese.
Realization hit the doctor like a ton of bricks 5 minutes too late.
That bastard!
What happened?
Misa asked, scratching her head. Did you not hear that incredibly phony attempt at Japanese? He was pretending he couldn't speak very well, so I translated everything into English. But once he left, he spoke perfect Japanese, and it was flawless. He spoke better Japanese than Misa-chan.
Hey!
Raito arrived home around 9:30, late for dinner, but early enough to catch his family watching TV. He slipped off his shoes, spotting his sister's and his mother's, but not his father's. He was still most likely at work, struggling to find the killer before he killed his son. In the living room, his sister and mother were lazing on the couch, watching the news. You're late tonight, Raito, his mother commented, smiling in greeting. You said you would be home for dinner. What happened? Misa-chan and Kiyomi-chan decided to take me out for dinner because I had won a bet today on whether Misa-chan could eat a whole spoonful of wasabi. She couldn't, and they took me to a restaurant. I was going to call, but I had forgotten my cell phone at home. He flashed an apologetic smile. I'm sorry. Next time I won't leave you out in the dark. His mother nodded and turned off the TV. I understand. If you're hungry, there are some leftovers in the refrigerator. We were just about to get ready for bed. She beamed at her daughter, yawning sleepily. Is father at work? Sachiko nodded. Okay, I'm also going to bed. I had a lot of patience today. He kissed his mother goodnight on the cheek and helped half-asleep Sayu up the stairs. He led her to her room and closed the door behind him. As Raito undressed in his room, he spotted a lone origami star on his desk. The paper used to make it was blue with red hearts, the saying, I love you, scattered in various areas. He picked it up gently, observing the star carefully. He rolled the star on his palm, almost mesmerized by it. He touched it gently with his forefinger, afraid to apply too much pressure. He broke out of his trance when he heard a snug voice.
You're dating someone?
Raito spun around to find his little sister leaning against his doorframe, looking as if she ruled the world through blackmailing everyone. Sayu? I thought you were half asleep. Sayu shrugged and pushed herself out of the doorframe.
And I thought you were single.
I am single.
But you told that patient you were taken.
God damn that Misa!
You're really not dating anybody behind my back, are you, Raito?
Raito had a strange feeling that anybody could interpret this into a different meaning than a conversation between a brother and a sister.
Unless you're going out with Hideki, of course.
What is that supposed to mean, Sayu? He growled, too tired to play any games.
Misa told me about Hideki and how depressed you're being since he left. She said you lied your way out of a relationship because of him.
It wasn't a relationship he was offering. It was a one-night stand. And so what if I lie my way out of it? It has nothing to do with Hideki-san.
Misa, Hiyomi, and I think differently.
Sayu smirked, resembling too much like her older brother for Raito's comfort. Sayu, will you drop this?
No! Raito, you're obviously hurting on the inside. Would you please just tell me what's wrong?
Raito's eyebrow twitched before he flew into a fury. What do you want me to say?
He hissed hotly, barely keeping his voice down as to not wake his mother. Then I made the stupidest mistake of my entire life by acting 2 seconds too slow. Then I'm constantly haunted by his memory because people can't learn how to take a hint and I don't want to talk about him. Then every little detail of this world, every waking moment and every goddamn dream reminds me of him so much I want to curl up and die. Is that what you wanted to hear, saw you? That your other mother is being driven insane by a man who he will never see again because he practically told him not to. Raito shoved past her, stormed down the stairs, out of the house, slammed the door, and threw himself in his car, driving 20 miles over the speed limit down the street.